You just did the math in your head. A house or a stock portfolio. You picked one before you even finished reading that sentence. Most people do. But the real answer is far stranger than either side of that argument wants to admit. Because the debate you've heard 1,000 times isn't actually about houses or stocks. It's about a mistake almost everyone makes without noticing. A mistake buried so deep in the way you calculate returns that even smart, careful people fall for it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it changes which side of this argument you should actually be on. Start with the version of the story you already know. Real estate feels safe. You can touch it. You can live in it. Prices rarely crash to zero overnight. Stocks feel abstract. Numbers on a screen that can vanish in a single red afternoon. So intuition says real estate wins on safety, and stocks win on growth. Simple trade-off. Pick your risk tolerance and move on. Except that story falls apart the moment you look at actual data instead of vibes. In 2013, economists Pete Eichholz, Kees Kodak, and Mark Frank set out to answer a question nobody had ever answered properly. What does housing actually return? Not over 10 years, not over 50, but over 400 years. They found the Harengracht Canal in Amsterdam, a street of townhouses that had been sold and resold since the 1600s, with prices recorded almost continuously. For centuries of real transactions. A researcher's dream, the result surprised almost everyone who saw it. After adjusting for inflation, Amsterdam housing on that street returned close to 0% per year over 400 years. Not negative. Not spectacular. Essentially flat. Sit with that for a second. 400 years of buying homes in one of the most desirable, historically stable cities in the world. And the real, inflation-adjusted return was almost nothing. Now compare that to stocks. Jeremy Siegel, an economist at the Wharton School, spent decades compiling something similar for equities. In his research, later published as Stocks for the Long Run, he tracked U.S. stock market returns back to 1802. The number he found, adjusted for inflation, was roughly 6 to 7% per year, compounded, for over 2 centuries. 6 or 7% doesn't sound dramatic. But compounding is patient and a little bit cruel to people who don't respect it. At 7% real growth, money doubles roughly every 10 years. Over 200 years, that's not double. That's not even 10 times. It's a number with more zeros than most people can casually picture in their head. So why does the popular story insist real estate is the better long-term bet? Because of a quiet trick your brain plays on you. It's called money illusion, a term formalized by economist Irving Fisher back in the 1920s. Money illusion is your tendency to think in nominal dollars instead of real, inflation-adjusted dollars. Your grandparents bought their house for $20,000. It's worth $600,000 now, 30 times the price. Feels like a miracle. But almost all of that miracle is just inflation and time, not real wealth creation. Adjust for the falling value of the dollar itself, and much of that 30 times gain quietly evaporates. Stocks get inflated by the same illusion, just less often, because their growth is usually reported already adjusted in indexes and total return charts. Housing gains get reported the raw, exciting way. One number games your intuition, the other doesn't. That asymmetry alone explains a huge amount of the argument you've heard your whole life. But there's a second, even bigger reason the comparison misleads people. It has nothing to do with the asset. It has to do with leverage. When you buy a stock, you almost always pay the full price. When you buy a house, you usually put down 20%, sometimes less, and borrow the rest. That means a 5% rise in the value of the house is actually closer to a 5% return on the cash you personally put in. This is why real estate feels like it outperforms in conversation, even when the underlying asset barely beats inflation. It's not the house working harder. It's the debt magnifying whatever the house does in both directions. Leverage doesn't just amplify gains. In 2008, it amplified losses just as violently, wiping out homeowners who were leveraged 5-to-1 almost overnight. Economists have a name for what leverage actually is. It isn't extra return. It's borrowed risk, repackaged to look like skill. So which one is actually the better investment? Here's the reframe almost nobody makes out loud. You're not comparing two investments. You're comparing an investment to a leveraged, a liquid, tax-advantaged, forced savings machine that also happens to keep you dry when it rains. A house does something a stock portfolio structurally cannot do. It provides shelter you would otherwise pay for anyway, through rent, every single month, for the rest of your life. Economists call this concept imputed rent, and it was studied extensively by economist Franco Modigliani, whose work on life cycle savings helped explain why homeownership behaves less like an investment and more like a savings mechanism with a roof attached. That framing changes everything. Because owning a home isn't really versus stocks. It's versus renting and investing the difference. That's the real comparison. And the answer to that comparison depends entirely on numbers nobody puts in headlines. Local rent-to-price ratios, mortgage rates, property taxes, maintenance costs, which studies consistently put around 1 to 2% of a home's value every single year, quietly eating into that already thin real return. Meanwhile, stocks carry almost none of those hidden costs. No roof repairs, no property tax bill, no leaking pipe at midnight. Just volatility. Sharp, uncomfortable, headline-generating volatility, which is precisely the price you pay for liquidity and diversification. You can sell 10% of a stock portfolio on a Tuesday afternoon. Try selling 10% of a house. This is the part your brain doesn't want to hear, because your brain likes clean winners. Real estate isn't a better investment than stocks. Stocks aren't a better investment than real estate. They're solving two different problems, wearing the same investment costume. One gives you leveraged exposure to a slow, inflation-tracking asset that also happens to keep you warm at night. The other gives you unleveraged exposure to the productive output of human labor and innovation, compounding quietly for 2 centuries, with none of the shelter and none of the plumbing. The 400-year Amsterdam data isn't an argument against buying a home. Owning where you live can still make enormous financial sense, especially once you count avoided rent, tax benefits, and forced monthly savings discipline that most people would never otherwise stick to. But it is a warning against treating your house like your growth engine. That job, historically, belongs somewhere else. So the next time someone tells you real estate always beats the stock market, or that stocks always beat real estate, you now know the honest answer. Neither claim survives contact with 400 years of actual data. You didn't do the math wrong earlier. You just did the math your brain was built to do, the fast, intuitive, nominal dollar version. The real math was always quieter, slower, and a little less satisfying to repeat at a dinner party. But it's the version that's actually true.